All right, welcome everyone. In this video today, I thought we would do a little commentary over me working on this panel from Box Chronicles. It was drawn by Eryk Donovan, and we worked together a long time ago, very early on in my career, on a little sci-fi short, and here we are 9 years later doing it all over again. And so I love Eryk's art very much. I thought this was an absolutely gorgeous panel. And it's the sort of panel that a beginner or someone that has less practice might look at and find to be a little daunting. There's a lot of detail, there's a lot of depth, there's a lot happening. The action in the panel, in the script, is the two little the children there in front of the kebab stand. So I thought it would be interesting to go back and look through the process and talk about my decision making along the way. So I'm just going to hit play and let it roll. This is about half an hour, I think. So, you know, get a coffee, tea, water, hydrate, whatever it is that you're drinking, and let's check it out. So for starters, whether the panel is complex or simple, I'm still going to try to break it down into some very basic shapes and simplify anything that might seem complex, you know. And so here, the first thing I'm going to do is start creating some depth with that far background. So I'm sort of imagining this dark color as being a visual pattern, and I am breaking that pattern with, in this case, lighter values and, you know, some different brighter colors back there. My thought process was this place, you know, has a lot of neon lights, a very cyberpunkish looking location. And so as more and more of those lights blend, and we see that far down the line, they're going to blend close to white as they get close together. And so it does a good job of sort of tricking the eye into thinking that there's a lot more depth here than we can see in 2D. And I'm taking that bright light and sort of pulling it down to reflect on the ground, as if maybe it had rained recently or something. And, you know, again, sort of trying to contribute to that kind of cyberpunk feel that I felt. I've also maybe been playing too much Cyberpunk 2077. Maybe that's it. But you'll notice I'm not going quite as bright on the lines down the alley because, of course, you know, that's not reflecting all of that white back here. And this, I was not using my usual flatter on this, and so you'll see me sort of grab flats a couple times, trying to see what all was flatted together. So. But here I'm starting to add really a secondary color. Really, so far it's only blue. And so I'm going to start blending some other colors that are nearby that blue on the color wheel and just visually from a contrast standpoint. So there's some warm colors here, there's some cool colors here, but they're very close in value and they're very close in hue right now. Because again, I'm trying to set a base pattern that I can then break. You can sort of see that starting to happen here, like that little yellow green thing that's happening right there in the front. I'm starting to pull you in toward the center. You know, that little lime greenish color that I've got going on there is the only thing like that. And so I'm starting to pull you in, and then I pull even further away from the rest of that pattern to the opposite side of the color wheel to orange and yellow to really get that strong single unique color that really only appears right there. And so from a value standpoint, that little booth is the brightest, most intense thing on the page at the moment. And there's no other color like it. And that is what gives it its power right now. And you'll notice that I will be very, very careful about where I use that orange and yellow, because if I start throwing orange and yellow everywhere, then it's no longer breaking the pattern, it's creating more pattern, which is not what I'm trying to do here. And so you will see me use a little bit more of that later, but it won't be as intense and it won't be quite as bright. All right, so I am breaking into my commentary to provide a little additional commentary. So in this image, I want you guys to think about it this way, and I've explained this on my stream several times. This is a color wheel. It has the most saturated versions of the color around the outside, and it gets less saturated toward the center. So this is high saturation, medium saturation, no saturation. You can imagine the values as being a Z-axis coming out of the monitor if you would like to. But strictly from a color standpoint, I want to explain a little bit more about what I'm thinking here. So the color that I started with, let's say, is about right there. And all of the colors that I have chosen so far kind of fall along this path as we're going toward white. About the warmest thing we get is a really desaturated orange. But that entire background, if you can imagine a little rubber band being tied around the whole thing. And that rubber band would have a certain amount of tension on it. Now, when I want to increase the contrast and I want to pull something forward and make something different and make something stand out, or create a focal point, whatever you want to call it. In this case, where the green and yellow is right there in the middle of the image. So I start by, you can imagine, taking that rubber band and stretching it a little bit more. So we're increasing the tension now on this rubber band. It's a little bit tighter because we've got this point out here. And then I'm going to increase it even further by getting some oranges and yellows. So again, imagine that rubber band that started right here is now being stretched all the way out here before it comes back. And so the tension or the contrast between these points is lower than the tension being pulled to this point. And you will see me do this at every single stage of this drawing. This is sort of how I think about contrast. It's how I think about how colors relate to each other, because colors, when you're choosing colors, they're always a comparison. And so later on, when I have a background of just the oranges and yellows as around the robot, so again, remember, let's draw our little rubber band around that. Well, how am I going to break that pattern? If I choose a robot color that's in this range, well, the tension's that's not very much tension. That's not very much contrast. We're barely changing anything. But if I make him gray, he's here. So now we're taking our little rubber band that ties around those points and we're pulling it all the way down here. And so the robot, the skin color and the clothing on the robot are all kind of in here. And so he's here, the background is here. The distance is the contrast between the two. And then I'm going to do it again on the robot itself. His skin's here. I think he's got a white apron, so it's right next to it. And then he's got like a cool blue shirt. So the robot is here. If I want to create a point of contrast on the robot, where am I going to go? Well, I could go up here. I could go over there. I chose red. Take that tension, and he's going to have a red eyeball. So I hope that's clear. I realize that's a little bit maybe not how you've heard contrast described, but if you think about contrast in this way, it will make things a lot easier for you. But yeah, at this stage, I'm still just sort of grabbing whatever has not been flatted yet or not been chosen with some color. All of those signs in the back are creating way too much contrast with something so far away. So you'll see me again start to bring those little green signs in the background a little bit closer to everything else around it so that it doesn't create too much contrast. You'll notice that contrast is the key with everything here. So I am using a brush here that actually has a little color jitter in it. It does a couple of different colors when you put it down. And it's a nice little textury brush that gives you a different set of, like there's a little hue jitter in there if you want to play around with that. And I like it because if it doesn't matter what color something is very much, it's nice to just get some color noise in there, you know. And this guy's also, they're selling meat, you know, and so again, I am putting down some reds and browns and things to represent the food that he's selling. And that red is also something you won't see me just throw around very willy-nilly because that red itself helps with it being sort of a unique color on the palette right now. Now you'll see me try a few things, I think, on this robot. The first thing I did was, I drew some light on the countertop and to sort of show that the light's coming from behind him, tossing a shadow. on the counter. And most of this, the colors that I'm choosing at this point, there's a lot of experimenting going on. I knew the robot was going to be kind of light or gray color, but I wasn't sure about his clothing. And I tried a couple of different things, including making, his shirt stand out a lot. And then I was like, it's a little much. And so I ended up really, I think, just going with sort of a gray and blue, and allowing the red of his glowing eye be what breaks that little pattern, because these same patterns and breaking and things that I'm doing happens even at this scale. So you can imagine the entire canvas as just that little booth. Well, I've got a background of orange. I'm breaking that pattern with, blues and whites on the robot. And then when we get to the robot, I'm breaking the pattern on the robot by adding the red eye. And so these things are scalable, very sort of fractal in how it works. But and you'll see me do a little bit on top of the lines here, just to draw a little bit of focus to the item that he's handing off. And again, I don't even know if you can barely see that it's there, I think, in the final, but I liked how it looked, instead of having just have the black ink to represent it. So, oh yeah. And then, so now I've gone over to the other robot, and we're doing a little bit of warmth over there. And I think what I end up doing is just doing little warm bits of light inside every little booth, as in, the robots have learned, probably through AI, that we like warm lights. And so they're all using mathematically AI optimized color temperatures in their booths. And you'll notice, though, that I didn't get quite as yellow in these other oranges. So that way, these other orange booths, even if you look at them across the panel, the one in the middle has a little bit more yellow. It's a little bit brighter than the rest. It's also right in the center of the image, and so that helps. Orange cat. He could have been any color, but he's surrounded by cool colors, so we'll make him orange. And through here, I noticed I just wanted a little bit more texture in the ground. It was a little too plain, and so this isn't really light or shadow. It's just stuff. Something to make the ground look a little bit less smooth. Because whenever you do a lot of little detailed things like this, like big areas of flat color, don't look good to me. And so you'll see me just dirty things up sometimes with something. And this is a little inset panel, they call it. When you have a panel inside a panel, it's an inset panel. And it's showing off the how square their food is, and how unnatural it is. And you'll see me go through several different attempts at what color should this background be. Like, this is the kind of thing that I'll spend more time probably trying to decide on that than the rest of the image. But the principles are the same. I have a big panel, and I need this little panel to really stand out. Otherwise, you could lose it, in the panel if you're not careful. If I used colors that were similar to what was around it, then that little panel, somebody might skip right over, if it wasn't, pulled out there. And so by having it have that red ring, and then I end up doing like a little gradient behind it to make sure that comes forward. But it looks like I've moved on to other things at the moment. Yeah, I'm back or we're doing the next door robot, his booth. And here, again, like using a slightly different color, but I'm making sure that the value of that booth does not overpower the value of the middle booth. That's effectively what my brain is trying to work through at the moment. So by having those oranges, really kind of deep oranges, over on the side of the panel, we still get the warm light, but it's not, it's not overpowering the contrast in the middle. All right, so I'm going back to the background. We're going to start filling in some of the rest of this, and all these robots, I think, are the same model. So with different clothing, so I keep the red light action going on here. And the important thing is these aren't random color choices. Like I want to keep reiterating that the colors of the sign on the booth on the right, I've got a range that if I get too bright, it's going to be brighter than the brighter part of the image, which doesn't make any sense. If I get too dark, you're not going to be able to see it. The image will dictate your color choices to an extent, as long as you have a plan to begin with. Here, I realized that the sky was a little too close to the buildings. And so I first thought, well, I'll change the color of the buildings to something different, but none of that really struck me as a way to handle this. And so I ended up just changing the color of the sky instead. And I think of this as being, a massive sprawling city. And so you would have bright lights, coming up in the distance. And that way I get my contrast with the buildings that I want without even having to change the color of the buildings. And here I am going in with a little pencil tool and just following the contours that Eryk has drawn to kind of dirty up the streets a little bit, to make them look a little bit more reflective, like they are, catching all that light being reflected from way down. And again, most of that detail is close to where the kids are, a little bit less so everywhere else. That is also intentional. Now here I realized that the booth would reflect in the ground, especially when you have when the ground is wet, especially. And so there's a little bit of cast lighting that I put down, like I'm thinking about the surface, and then you'll see me sort of pull down some bright yellows and things to give it the appearance that the building is actually reflecting on the ground. And this goes a long way to selling a wet ground because anything that is slick and reflective like that becomes more and more mirror-like. And so that's why you're seeing me pull down that little green that green screen on the far right hand side, a little bit of reflection on that. I'm starting to do a little bit of detailing and rendering where I think it needs it, which was not very much. A little bit of reflections on the robots just to sell that they're metal, and a little different than everything else around them. And you'll see me back up like this and look at it pretty often. I'm just making sure that everything is still reading as I want. I'm going to start on the kids now, doing their costumes. There wasn't really much direction needed on this. This was sort of a flashback situation, and so just thinking about the kind of clothes kids wear, bright colors. Maybe this little girl, maybe she killed an antelope or something for that jacket. I don't know. But even her clothing, like those browns are there contrasting against the blue. It wasn't an accident. She's right around a lot of cool gray colors. And so a little warmth on her helps bring her forward. I did a little bit of lighting on the kids here to make sure it looks like they're standing, close to this little bright oasis on the street. And it's been a couple of days since I've done this, so I don't know what's coming next. I am following along with you. Who knows what I was thinking at this point? Oh yeah, bringing out his sign a little bit more. Now right here is where I started trying to fix the background behind the little boy there in the blue hoodie. And so I started by pulling the yellow light down behind him, which works a little. I don't think it works quite as well as what I end up figuring out. There is a little building behind him that I'm going to push down the street, and that is what's going to really help quite a bit. Doing a little bit of a subtle glow here on top of the lines. I am not a huge fan of a lot of digital looking glow effects on this type of line art. And so I'm trying to keep that very, very subtle. And here I think I'm starting to work on the signs, because I realize I've got a lot of signs. There's going to be a lot of bright lights and neon and that kind of stuff. And so I start putting them in. Some glows on top of the lines. And I think I end up changing the color of the lines on most of those. So a little bit more interesting colors wherever I can, because at this point, you know, the main focal point, the main color scheme has been established, and so from here on out, it's really just pushing and pulling a little bit of what's there. Here, I am making a selection of all of those lines in the far background, and I'm going to color those a different color. And this is sort of like the equivalent of putting a glow over the top without having to do a glow over the top. And I noticed there that it sort of messed the contrast up on that sign that says neon right in the middle. But that gave me an idea of doing the neon lights ink lines is actually white, which I think I sort of accidentally did, and then it looked good. So I was like, wait a minute. So you'll see me, yeah, there it was. Like, yep, that looks cool. So I'm making a selection around the ink lines. You can't use your flats for this because your flats cut through the center of the line, and so you have to select around it. And I really liked the contrast of how bright those lights were compared to everything else. And so by spreading them around, they become another layer in the background pattern. You know, if I had just randomly chosen like one or two signs, then those might draw a little too much visual focus because there's nothing else like them. But if you have 6 signs lit up across the top of the panel, they just become a part of that pattern that you are breaking. I know, I think I said that twice, but it's an important point. Sorry. I thought about changing it here too, thinking maybe this is a sign, and then I decided not to. Because I kind of like having all those bright lights across the top. Like, again, they sort of form their own pattern. And I'm going to continue that on all of those little signs. We're going to make those white too. Yeah, here I'm taking a soft airbrush and just kind of dabbed it down that alleyway. And so what you end up with is a big, soft, kind of bluish light that looks more like fog or something because it is over the lines. And I'm trying to find some places to introduce a few more glows, but I didn't really care for how it looked, so most of it's pretty subtle. I ended up going back in here and doing a little bit more highlights down the street. Because of this thing called the Fresnel effect, you're actually going to get more reflections the further down the street you look. You know, if we were standing here looking at the ground, if we looked at our feet, you wouldn't really see much reflection from those white lights down the way. But the further you look down the horizon, toward the horizon, it's going to get brighter on the street because it's reflecting more and more light the further back you go. Which is why there's kind of a subtle gradient from the bright to not so bright on that at the bottom. The reflections in the street, I meant there. This little guy I realized I didn't do anything with, so I started a little different with him. I started by, I want him to feel a part of this environment. So just throwing the yellow light from the TV, the warm light from the kitchen or the robot, and then a few, little brighter, just general ambient lights from behind him. And he was good to go. Jumped onto an overlay layer to tint his jacket and backpack and all that stuff without affecting the underlying values very much. And that is coming into the end. There's a few more little touches before this thing wraps up. But thank you so much for watching. I hope you guys enjoyed this. I kind of like doing this kind of video, but let me know what you guys think. If you pick something up, this is a waste of time, whatever it was, let me know in the comments. And do check the description. I have coloring courses, step-by-step how to color in Photoshop, Clip Studio. I've got some Procreate courses. There's a lot of ways to support this channel. Become a patron, YouTube member. I do a live stream for those every month. Give feedback on your work. That sort of thing. Here, this guy's building is about to get pushed down the street. but that really sets off the character in the front a lot better than it did before. So all of that was in the line art. I didn't really read it right the first time, I don't think. And so that's about it. Thanks again for watching. Click buttons. Click any button. Just click something. I'll see y'all in the next one.